Genger received her BA from Brown University in 2001 and attended the School of Art Institute of Chicago in 2002. She has served as a guest lecturer, visiting artist at Mass Art, Museum of Arts and Design, Ohio State University, Museum of Contemporary Art, Denver, Indianapolis Museum of Art, Cranberg Academy of Art, and the Aldrich Contemporary Art Museum, among others. Orly has delivered her largest and most labor-intensive work yet, a public sculpture in Madison Square Park called Red, Yellow, Blue, on view through September 8th, and you really all should try very hard to go and see it. It's pretty spectacular. It's made of 1.4 million feet of hand-crocheted lobster fishing rope, which she has used to create 3 towering enclosures, each painted a different primary color. Genger's recent solo show include the installation and also Iron Maiden, which is up through June 22nd at Larissa Goldston Gallery in New York. She has had many exhibitions, as we've just conveyed. Genger also started a jewelry line for a gift shop in Indianapolis Museum of Art, where she was showing whole in 2008. So there is a line of jewelry that's pretty spectacular, ladies. You might want to check it out. And thank you for coming. Yes, absolutely. She will be interviewed today by Adam Glick. And I understand, Adam, that you have a new position.
I do. I actually work with Barbara, and I'm the Associate Director for Gallery Lelong. I left the park about 2 weeks ago.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to the old bio.
So go back to the which is still relevant.
Right, absolutely. Joined the Madison Square Park Conservancy in October of 2011 as Associate Curator, during which time he was responsible for shaping the Madison Square Arts Program and the installation of Orly Genger's work. Prior to joining Madison Square Park Conservancy, Mr. Glick worked in the Director's Office in the Museum of Contemporary Art. And he has held positions in the Museum of Modern Art, the International Fine Print Dealers Association. Mr. Glick is a graduate of University of California, Santa Barbara, etc. So we are very, very happy to have you here. And I'm just going to close down the lights and have you begin.
Well, I think we'll keep this fairly informal. Orly and I have been going over questions and the installation and her history, but it's more interesting when you have the questions and we sort of guide the conversation. But we'll start by just talking a little bit about what led Orly to making art, and a little bit through Madison Square Park's installation, all the nitty-gritty about that. So I wanted to start by asking Orly, what led you to making art, and specifically this sort of installation?
Well, making art in general, that was just something that I always did. But this installation started, now it's, I guess, a little bit over 2.5 years ago. I was approached by Debbie Landau, who's the head of the Conservancy. She asked me to put together a proposal for the park. So it started there. I came up with actually 2 ideas at the time, one of which was actualized. And the process like this, how that just started.
So if we go through some images of your previous work, we see obviously the common thread is using there's a lot of puns in the questions. Common thread, all tied up, very naughty, whatever you want. So using this sort of material, what attracts you to doing something on such a large scale and that's so physically involved?
Well, it didn't start out this large. This process and this material started actually when I was studying at Art Institute of Chicago, which was in 2001. And I was making a very different sculpture at the time out of different material. And I felt quite stuck with my work. And I had seen a woman crocheting, and I got entranced by the movement of her hand and the hook that she was using, and I started looking at it and thought to myself, it seems like I could do that movement, I can make that happen, but without the hook, and I could just use my finger to do it. And right after that, I remember I just picked up some yarn and started copying that movement. And at the time, it was really a way for me to pass the time and to keep my hands moving, because I felt stuck with the work that I was making in school. And I had always believed, and I guess instinctually thought, that the most important thing was to keep moving, to keep making things no matter what. And I'd figure out later what it was, what I was doing, what it meant. So initially, I picked up some yarn and started kind of finger crocheting. As I said, really thought of it as a way to just pass the time. And I had, after a while, accumulated all these little pieces, different shapes, different colors, and ultimately decided to connect all these little pieces that I had kind of stored away in a closet somewhere. And I was surprised by what came out, because it was kind of unexpectedly muscular. It was something, it laid on the ground, and it was very colorful, and it kind of had this gravity to it that I wasn't expecting to see. And that was the first time I thought, and it was still yarn at the time, so it had a very different feeling. It was the first time I thought to myself, oh, maybe I can actually make sculpture using this material in this process. So it began on a much smaller scale with a material that was much more expected from the process, which was yarn. And this is several years later. I had been given, actually before this, right before this show, this is at the Aldrich Museum, an opportunity to make an outdoor piece at Socrates Sculpture Park. And I was trying to find a way that I could translate the material in the process so that I could sustain the elements. And I came across climbing rope. So I started using climbing rope for these outdoor pieces and started to really fall for the heft of the material. And that's when I kind of started to get drawn into a massiveness and a more physically challenging process. So this show at the Aldrich Museum is actually the one right after Socrates. And it was the first large-scale outdoor piece that I did. And in this one, the rope, it's climbing rope, and the rope here is actually not painted. So I was still not using paint at the time. I was just using the natural colors of the climbing rope.
Great. You also draw.
Orly, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
So that gigantic installation, what happens after the end of does it come back to your studio?
This particular piece came back to my studio, and I reused the material for other pieces.
And we'll talk a little bit more about that too with Madison Square Park.
Can you also talk about the video that you made while you did this piece?
Yeah, there is a video that I made that I consider to be a separate piece. And it's a video of me basically crawling underneath the piece. And so I think there are a few different elements to that video. One is, I think what I wanted it to portray was actually the heaviness of the material, because you see this and there's a lightness to it, especially because of the color and the way that it flows, and you kind of, I think, have a feeling that there is something very light about it. But in reality, the material is quite heavy. So putting your body underneath it was really actually frightening at points, very, very difficult. And then the other idea behind that was, when you looked at the piece from above, when I was underneath it, it was a way of kind of activating the piece and animating it, because this piece just really relies on the natural structure of what's underneath it and doesn't have its own internal structure. So I was interested in kind of pointing that out and giving the internal structure by putting myself inside of it.
Which leads me to talk a little bit about your drawings, and if we could step outside the detail of the rope material, the physical engagement, sort of the way you conceptualize juxtaposing the masculine and the feminine, and obviously your own size and stature being so petite with these large-scale installations and these drawings that are so focused on sort of body parts and musculature and all these sorts of things. Sort of, what is your approach, and what is attractive to you about sort of bringing those into your work, those elements?
So these drawings, and I think this is it's really hard to see this.
Yeah, they're a little fuzzy on your screen.
Yeah, I'll show you in that one. But
Yeah.
they are, I don't know, we don't have the detail, but they are made up of, they're drawings of superhero limbs that are kind of combined. And I guess it is hard to see here, but the drawings are works of their own. They're not sketches, but I think the way I view them is that the drawings and the sculpture both inform each other. The superhero limbs came from both the idea that these intertwined limbs is sometimes how it feels when you're working with a rope. It's a very physical process, and you're using all parts of your body. And then there's kind of a lighter side to it, which is, glorifying the real kind of superhero strength that it takes, and also I think our inclination to think of men as the ones to do the heavy lifting.
Not this man.
What's the scale of this?
That's a good question. It's probably about the size of this.
You also work in collage as well?
Yeah.
So here's a little bit more detail of the limbs.
Right, so this is a much, much smaller piece. But yeah, so and then the timing here is a little mixed. This is way beforehand, but the idea was using material and abstraction to kind of suffocate individuals. And there's a piece later on where you actually see that I do a performance.
Right, let me actually just scroll ahead to that. I believe that's perfect timing to see. And we'll come back to these. But as you're talking about being buried underneath.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
So that was actually an ex-boyfriend now. It's an ex-boyfriend.
Was this the moment he became?
I don't know why. But he was very generous, and actually it was during an opening, so he was under there for about 2 hours.
He didn't know he was on his way out.
Well, let's go back a little bit. You can tell us if there's other ex-boyfriends buried under these pieces. The dirty secrets come out in our table breakfast. But thinking about your work, this is at Indianapolis, being indoor and outdoor, sort of how you approach what you do when you're using the rope and similar material, being inside versus being outside, and how you see the public's engagement with your work depending on where it's installed.
Well, so this is indoors at the Indianapolis Museum, and it's the entrance to the museum. It's a really challenging space because while it is indoors, it's quite vast, and there's a little bit of a transition between being outside and inside, and it's obviously all windows, as you can see, so it's a little, it's a little blurry in that respect. It's not like you're in a white wall gallery or museum space. But this, and it's interesting also how much of a difference it makes where you show, because this was in Indianapolis, and the response that I got there, I think, is very different than it would have been in New York.
In what
Or
way?
in Miami here, you
Right.
see, which is
Right.
the lounge.
Only in what way?
Well, if we can go back to the Indianapolis
Certainly.
piece, these are, you can sort of tell the scale there. They're quite massive in size, and they're made up of many layers, and they're supposed to be almost kind of perfect cubes in response to a lot of the minimalist pieces that were made by mostly men in the 60s and the 70s. And I wanted to show I wanted to make pieces that were, very similar in scale and size, but in a way almost kind of I always think about it like like skinning those sculptures, the steel sculptures, and actually showing the guts, showing, knot by knot what it takes to make an object of that size and that scale. A lot of that work was so much about taking the hand out, and this is, in fact, the opposite. But the black was there to kind of reference that, the steel and metal. But in what way was it different than I think it would be in New York was, I got quite a few responses. People didn't like the black. It really bothered them, to a point where I was actually surprised because, we're living in a community where it takes a lot to kind of make us upset or,
Or to get away from black.
Right. But, there were comments like people thought it wasn't appropriate for the holidays. And I have to say, Lisa Friedman, who was at the time there, who was the head curator there at the time, who actually just left for Virginia Commonwealth, is phenomenal. And her program was great. But it's, the audience, the local audience, it was just interesting to experience that.
Though also, when we were installing red, yellow, and blue in Madison Square Park, people would come by, and I'm not sure if you remember, but my favorite comment by one of the visitors when we were installing was, "What is this?" And we answered, "This is the next art installation." And he looked at me and said, "So you'll hang the art on this, right?" So even in New York, you still get your fair share of
At least that's like a constructive.
Right, it was very confused in a few seconds. And I thought, well, we'll do something with this. We'll get to that, obviously, because there's a lot to discuss. But you also have created these wonderful loungers, and this is in Miami, I believe, 2010?
I don't remember the year.
2011. So different types of engagement on a smaller scale. More from Indianapolis. And that brings us to Mass Mocha, where you had Big Boss breaking through the wall.
Well, a little bit beforehand about the lounge chairs, because there was Indianapolis, which was clearly these very minimalist structured objects, and I had always felt really I felt like I could go in two ways at the same time, which was these really minimalist, rigid structures and shapes, and then on the other hand, I felt very tied to an organic feel, which was kind of like the Eldridge Museum, which where you saw the material do something where you kind of expected it more to tack that way, in a flowing, organic, natural way, almost a more feminine way. And I was always torn between those two sides. So I wanted to create these objects so the way these started, where they were actually stacks. There were these kind of perfect white stacks, and then there was a performative aspect where I would just push them over. And these are the results of pushing them over, and I just left them the way they were. And that was kind of trying to put those two sides together.
Right. So as you go from the very structured and
Could you push those over?
Alone? Probably not.
Maybe they would fall apart the same way. They would kind of fan out the same way.
Yeah, except for example, this one right up front, which was about 12 feet tall, had a structure in it, so that was
which for Mass Mocha you had both the very structured and very organic spilling breaking through the wall. And we could talk a little bit about this process and how this, in some ways, material-wise, influenced Madison Square Park, which we can get to next. But a little bit about Big Boss and what the project was like for you then.
So again, I was, as I said, I've been kind of torn between these two polar sides. I think actually Mass Mocha came before the lounge. But so this was in a very literal sense, and if you go, I don't know if it's the next slide, but you have it's the next slide. But so you have on one side the wall, which you can kind of see goes back to Indianapolis, and then on the other side you have the much more organic shape. So I wanted to create a piece here where in a very literal way you had the two polar opposites need each other, and in a way you didn't know where it started or where it ended, but wanted to really make a piece that had both elements.
Right.
So as you see, it kind of pushes through the wall.
And this is an example of.
Right, so this was actually the very first large-scale installation indoors after the Aldrich Museum at Larissa Goldson's gallery. And it was a piece where you walked in and you had to step on the material and on the installation. It was an overflowing through the space.
We covered that. So, we got that. And this is in Riverside Park. Sort of more imagery of that, which brings us to another park, to Madison Square Park, the project I'm most familiar with, obviously. And I think it would be interesting if we talk about, we've covered a little bit how the process started in making the work, but sort of the time that was involved, sourcing the material, and the installation process, and also sort of what you're responding to with the title and the scale of the work with red, yellow, and blue.
Well, the title was originally inspired by Barnett Newman's Who's Afraid of Red, Yellow, and Blue. And that was really a jumping off point for me. I was interested in using the primary colors because in a way I felt that they were considered to be accessible. And from the beginning I wanted this piece to be accessible to people. I knew it was going to be a piece that was placed in the middle of New York City. There would be all kinds of people approaching it, using it, all ages. And as opposed to the Indianapolis Museum where, the work might have seemed a little bit more restrictive or played more with the idea of intimidation. I did not want this work to do that. Instead, I wanted these pieces to actually make people feel held, or safe.
And here we see again, obviously, the combination of the very structure and sort of the decomposition at the end. And as we've seen people interact with the work, it's been up now for about 6 weeks. And you visited the park, obviously, a number of times, almost every day. I think you haven't. Many times. What has been something that you didn't necessarily anticipate in seeing the public engage with these seminars?
Well, I think it's interesting because we can both attest to it. When it first opened, we knew it was going to be interactive. We knew people would use it and sit on it. But when it first opened, it was, correct me if I'm wrong, but mayhem. There were people who, there was a grown woman, not a child, who climbed. And I hope it's not any one of you, but climbed to the top of Red and wanted to jump off.
I thought she was going to plant a flag. I was pretty sure she was going to stand there.
So I think I was surprised initially by how intense the usage was. Which was great. We immediately shut down the lawns and hired real security just for, safety issues.
Right. The park obviously wants people to engage with the work, but at the same time, we don't want to get suicide. And we also don't want people to hurt themselves, obviously, because it is a public space. But and this yellow is directly across from the park playground, so naturally that led for strollers coming in, people climbing, kids playing on it, which is part of what we want. But then a little bit about the installation process to talk with Orly about how we planned it out and where the material actually came from. If you want to share a little bit.
Sure.
About that.
So I think, as you heard already, it's about 1.4 million feet of rope. The rope was collected from all across the eastern seaboard. It's reclaimed lobster rope. So fishermen that could no longer use this rope basically sold it to us. And there's a foundation in Maine that collects this rope and recycles it. So I don't know how many months it took to collect it, but it was a major undertaking. It arrived in my studio, literally fresh from the ocean, so it was wet, it stunk. There were fish, scales in there, lobster claws, parts of, boats, So it was just to begin working with the material was quite a process. In the winters, the rope arrived frozen. So it was a major undertaking in that regard.
Did you collect and save any portion of the waste that you pulled from the materials?
There's probably some somewhere, but in my studio. But there was there was a lot that went into it that you wouldn't think about. But these are not all very long pieces of rope, so there was a lot of connections that had to be made. And before you make the connections, you want to kind of cut each end so it's a straight end. And so we ended up with lots of tiny little, like a room full of tiny little ends. I didn't keep all of it, but I probably have, I don't know, garbage bag full or something like that.
For recycling.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us about the physical, like how many people did this? I mean,
So the actual installation for
yeah, the actual installation.
And also the actual knotting.
Yeah, the knotting. How, we look at you, we know you couldn't have done it all alone.
That's the superhero part that we're talking about. So let's start at the beginning. When the rope arrives at your studio, how many assistants at any given time? And then how do you start actually crocheting and creating these pallets? Just for technical purposes, all of this was stored on wooden pallets, 4x4, and stacked about 4 feet high. So the process would be, Orly would say, I need more rope in the studio, and I finish a certain number of pallets. And it was very much like production.
I can tell you just as a side note, a funny story. So there was one point where, we thought we had enough rope, and then I actually finished it, and there was a good amount of time more where I could be working, and I was like, Adam, I need more rope. So it was like a major panic. We all did, but we ended up getting more rope, and I couldn't believe it. But I finished maybe I think it was 2 weeks before the deadline, and I was shocked. And one of the scariest moments was when Adam turned to me and he said, "Do you want me to get you more rope?" Because I actually had to say no, which is very against my nature. But I was like, I think I'm putting a cap on it.
And we have a little bit of leftover, in case there needs to be replacement, or when it ships off to Decor where it will be installed next. So there is replacement rope. So she worked so hard and was so dedicated over the course of 2.5 years that there's actually extra material that was made.
So it took 2.5 years.
From start to finish.
So-
really.
It took 2.5 years, and in terms of the labor that was involved, over the course of that time, it really ranged. In the beginning, there might have been one other person helping, and by the end, it was really as many hands as I could get, so maybe it was 7 or 8 people in the studio helping. And it's funny, when I first moved into my studio a few years ago, I thought, wow, this studio is massive. And then when I started working on this project, I was like, wow, this studio is so small. So we couldn't, there was, I consider the 2.5 years really to have been purely production, because what I was doing was trying to create enough material and the right material so when I got onto the site, I had enough of it to work, because a lot of decisions were actually made on site during installation. So we would, during the day hours, knot the rope, and then painting happened all throughout the night. So it was a very intensive, towards the end, very intensive period of time where the studio was pretty much 24 hours working.
How did you shift the movement of something that massive was always fascinating, especially in a city like New York? How did that work out for you?
Can we take that one? Let me just say first and foremost, Orly is by far the most organized artist I've ever had the pleasure of working with. So she was really guiding this process, saying, I'm on track, we need to ship in at this day, we need to ship in at this day. So it really was just logistics. And what we would do is the studio could hold anywhere between 10 to 14 boxes, and these are enormous boxes of rope. Pallets. Really a lot of rope. And so she would say, I'm getting close, we'll need to ship out. And it would go to a warehouse in New Jersey. And then that was also housing all of the raw rope that we had sourced, and we would ship in. And then eventually it all wound up in the warehouse in New Jersey. And so 2 weeks prior to installation, it was out of her studio, and we had about 6 tractor trailers come to the park over the course of 4 days, delivering all the rope with a forklift. And we would stage it on one side and do color by color. So we would place the colors next to the lawns where they would be going.
So you just these massive flatbeds that.
So it was 150, 155 pallets of rope that were stored in the park at any given time. And then at night you cover them with tarps, so if they got rained on, the water wouldn't absorb into the rope, making it unnecessarily heavy for people to lift. And the installation crew, you're looking at two of the finest members of the installation. That's about, there were only 7 of us in total who were actually doing the lifting and the threading. And the way this is installed is there are steel rods that this is threaded over. So each layer was done individually. And we'd stand back and Orly would say, no, it needs to be shaped this way. And she would be climbing up and saying it needs to be secured this way. We'd be hitting it with 2x4s, just compressing the rope. So it was hands-on from start to finish.
Maybe I missed it, but you at this last second mentioned paint. I was wondering, 2 questions about the color, the application of color. What kind of paint would not get on? I was picturing the rope was dyed. And the second, I've been through the park a few times while the piece is up there, and I didn't happen to notice a sign that said, you may touch this, you may climb on it. You can, because ordinarily, although most pieces in the park, you can imagine you could. You said people just immediately knew they could. Is there some sign, or is it just?
You may be the first person I've ever met who is looking for a sign to say that they can. Most people, I guess, just assume that they can.
It's okay.
Or don't even think about it, just do. So yeah, it's interesting to hear from the other perspective. And in terms of the paint, it's latex house paint, the same kind of paint you'd use to paint your house. And it was applied with a large sprayer, which is similar to how you would paint a house with this kind of large air compressor sprayer.
On the rope before it was
after it was knotted. So after we knotted it, then we primed each side. Prime one side, flip it over, prime the other side, wait till it dries, paint, flip it, paint. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Susan Schwab. I'm a guest of Judith Polnick, who's here today. So I'm trying to understand. I've seen the sculpture. By the way, I only touched it gingerly. I did not assume that I could climb on it. I saw nobody doing that, by the way. So, well, I'm imagining in the proposal processes where you had a model, you had sketches, how you imagine this piece evolving here. Because you didn't just say, I'm just going to mount up a lot of rope and put it around some trees in the park.
I would have, but the way that I work is, and it's, it gets to be quite challenging on the scale, but I work in a very intuitive fashion. But when you're working on this scale and when people are, giving you money to do this thing, and you're telling them, trust me, it'll be fine, it doesn't really work like that. So I did put together a proposal, and really the way I did it, and I made very clear from the start that it would be an intuitive process, that I gave an idea as to, I knew there would be a red, a yellow, and a blue. I knew which parks they would be, and I knew generally what kind of forms I wanted. For example, I knew with the red that I wanted it to go around the trees. I knew that I wanted it to be certain heights. But that's kind of how I worked with the parks, and then I filled it in from there. So there were certain points that I knew needed to happen with each lawn. And then basically during installation, it was the rest of it got filled in on the spot.
Right. And as Orly said earlier, a lot of it did happen on site. Once the rope arrived, we understood what the limitations were, how it would be secured, exactly what was necessary. But what was amazing to all of us, and I think to you as well, is how much or how close the actual project came to your latest renderings. Sort of how they jumped off the page.
It was actually shocking. I was surprised how close they were to the renderings.
So you did make drawings?
I Photoshop renders, but at the whole 2 years I was looking, I had them up on my wall, and I kept saying to myself, "Oh, it's just to give an idea. It's going to end up not looking like that." And it really did. It's strange how much it looked like.
We had sent images out to someone, and sorry, just one second, and they had said, "That's nice, but can you please send us the actual images?" And they were the actual images. They were the renderings. So now you saw the actual images.
Is this how you're going to do this at the Curator? You see the site and you're then going to figure out how to
So I'm actually in the
this
process
work.
of doing that, of thinking that through,
You had a question?
Here's a sort of a technical question. You said that originally when you saw crocheting that you threw away the idea of the crochet needle and just do it with your hands. And how does that affect you? I mean, working with this very strong rope and everything. And also, have you expanded on the way you do that knotting? Or is it still the old-fashioned crochet?
It's mostly based on the very standard crochet knot. There's a little changes here and there, for the ends or when I want to make certain lines a certain shape. But for the most part, I would say it's the standard crochet knot. In terms of the usage on the hands, there was at one point during those 2 years where it was very tough on the hands, but fine.
Well, I think about the climbing on it. When I was looking at it, I did want to climb on it, but I didn't. But I could see, the holes between the knots are very inviting to stick your foot in, and there's good places to grasp for your hands as you would climb it. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of people agree.
How many hours did it take you to install?
To install, it was about 2 weeks.
And it was a solid 2 weeks, on weekends, very early in the morning. Even though the rope was painted in advance, we obviously touched it up on site. And that actually took more time than we expected. Securing the park, placing plastic down so we didn't ruin the pathways, protecting people from coming in and getting fumes. So logistically, it was a bit trickier than we had expected, but it was a very intense 2 weeks.
It was.
That brings us to jewelry.
One last question. Why did you choose the Neiman famous red, yellow, blue?
It was a lot of my work references that period of time and men. It was the first time I actually dealt with a painter. But that title, Who's Afraid of Red, Yellow, and Blue, has been reused over the years by many artists. And it was kind of just a, hat off to the fan. And for me, really just a starting point in terms of which colors I wanted to use. And there was also a little bit of a lighter side there, a joke there. Who's afraid of red, yellow, and blue? Making such large sculpture of red, yellow, and blue.
I'm curious about the use of social media also with all of this, because I know you've been visiting the firm a lot and taking a lot of photos of other people taking photos. And as you can see in this photo, everyone's taking photos of their friends and other people taking photos. And so I would imagine that there are countless images online right now of all different strangers all around the world with pictures in front of this. Are you tracking that in some way or keeping?
It's funny that you asked that. I actually am, and I'm kind of picking ones that I find to be the most interesting or kind of funny or exciting, and I want to put together a little book at the end. It's amazing how, now because of social media, people kind of can put their photographs out there so easily and get likes and all that. So people get really creative with their photographs. So it's fun for me to see.
You just do a simple Google image search, Madison Square Park or Orly Genger or red, yellow, blue, you just see hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of pictures just cropped up.
Is it unusual for a commission that was proposed for the Madison Square Park to go on to another venue?
This is the first traveling
It
exhibition.
is, since I was wondering about that. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
We're excited.
And I should clarify, it's the first dedicated traveling exhibition. Works have gone other places, just sort of happily after the fact.
But this was planned.
When in the planning stages and in talking about this with the art committee and Orly and when I was at the park, we really thought this more than anything can't live and die in Madison Square Park. It has to go somewhere. It has to do something. And it can't just be something that's placed elsewhere. It needs to
How are you going to dismantle it to ship it to anybody?
I got out before that was my problem. No. Yeah, they might torture me and make me come back for it. It's dismantling the sculptures will be very much the same that they want to. It'll be layer by layer, and it will be back on the pallets, and it will be wrapped and put put on flatbed trucks and shipped back to the warehouse, and the Curator will take delivery in October when they're ready to start their installation. So it'll be slow and methodical, probably another 7 to 10 days of just unfurling and split.
Is there a structure under it at all? Are there poles?
So the structure is a steel plate that is then screwed into the ground.
Every 2 feet.
Every 2 feet, and there's a screw that goes about 3 feet into the ground that holds this base plate. In the center of that base plate is a steel rod. And depending on the height of the sculpture, it depends on the height of the steel rod that screws on. So every 2 feet you can screw on another one. And so it's threaded through that. At this height, and if you walk by the park, my favorite little part of this installation is that around the trees there are braces that are holding posts. And in order to camouflage that, Orly and I ran to the printers a few times and got camouflage contact paper to wrap around the brace.
It's the same, it's like a photograph of the tree
It's a
trunk.
photograph of that tree that is then camouflaged. Which actually was one of the largest time sucks getting it just right.
How about birds? The birds being messy or doing anything?
I don't
I
know.
don't think so. I mean, it's the squirrels love it. Squirrels treat it like an obstacle course. Jump over.
Yeah, we were concerned about its collapsing, I suppose. I mean, that would be the
So every park project, obviously, we have to work with the city. It's a private conservancy, so the city has to sign off on what we're doing. And part of that is to know that this isn't a danger and that it's well secured. And the park's very fortunate to have pro bono architectural engineering support by some of our board members. So they do these projects, they say for their fun, which is to our benefit. And they are the ones who really sort of chart out exactly how this needs to be. So it doesn't blow over in a hurricane, so it doesn't, if someone pushes on it, it doesn't fall. Similarly with Leo Villarreal's buckyball that was in the fall, we wanted to make sure that it could withstand Hurricane Sandy. So all these things are thought out well in advance. And then the jewelry about the yellow and blue, which I had nothing to do with.
Well, the jewelry line has been going on for a few years now. I collaborated with a jewelry designer named Jacqueline Mayer. And we make bracelets, necklaces, earrings, and they're all in one way or another referencing the sculpture, more specifically the robe. These particular pieces we made a tiny small collection that was for Madison Square Park, for the Madison Square Park project, so it was naturally replicating blue. The necklaces actually had references to when I first started putting together the proposal. I was looking at the map of the park from above and looking at the lawns, and what I actually did was just outline the exterior parts of the lawns, and the necklaces are kind of referencing those outlines. Those are bracelets. And so that's actually, if you can see there, cast. There's a very small kind of cast pieces of rope.
Where can you get these?
You can definitely get them on our website. We sell in some stores as well. Probably the easiest is on our website, which is ogjmnyc.com. ogjmnyc.com.
And just how much is one of those?
It's a good question. I don't remember offhand. I don't remember. Somewhere in the prior 200 range.
How did that begin? You said Indianapolis Museum was the first time you did it?
Yeah, so my friend Jacqueline Mayer happens to be a jewelry designer, and I had invited her to my studio before my opening. I said, can you bring over some of your own jewelry, because I'd like to wear something to the opening. So she came over and we started playing around with the material in the studio, and we made a necklace just for fun. I wore it, and one thing led to another. Yeah. Is that our last?
Are there questions?
Well, thank you so
Thank
much.
Can we now take a moment and just go around the room and introduce everybody as we've always done?
Hi, I'm Joan Agatanian Quinn, and I'm from Beverly Hills. I came in just to let us know.
to the background.
I'm Evelyn Braun. I'm Programs and Communications Manager at Art Table.
I'm Lindsay Baroni. I'm the VP of Operations here at artnet.
I'm Lucy Lyden. I'm the New York Programs Coordinator for Art Table.
I'm the independent curator and instructor at the 92nd Street Block.
Ashley Schreiber, the Special Events Manager here at artnet.
Ellen Kantrowitz, I'm a dealer and a collector. I'm very happy to be here. This was a wonderful program.
Gracie Manchin, I'm an auction specialist for the online auctions at ArtNet. And I also want to say that next month we're going to do an art evaluation program for Art Table members. Here. So.
I'm Megan Daly. I'm a writer. Laura Kruger, the curator for Hebrew Union College Museum. The last 2 weeks with the sexuality show.
I'm Deirdre Marr. I work at Blue Media in New York.
David Singer. I'm a very big fan of Wendy.
If he follows me everywhere, it's really weird. He's
He'll be under a pile of ropes soon.
Joy Glidden, host and executive director of Art Index TV.
I'm Randy Rosen. I just want to mention that June 24th, we have the second panel on the digitization of the art world at Sony, so if you haven't signed up, please do.
Barbara Campese. I'm an independent collections manager and artist, and I'm currently working at Gallery Lelong, filling in as the registrar and the
Sarah Marquette, and I'm an advisor, dealer, and curator.
Virginia Cupping, I'm an artist.
Mary Moonbaugh, I'm an independent art advisor and appraiser, and a great fan of yours. I deal with the list a lot. So I've been watching your work over the years, and I think it's just getting better and better. Thank you.
I'm Elizabeth Levine. I'm an independent art advisor in New York.
Judith Richards, independent art advisor, curator.
I'm Ann Cole. I work with Artist Estates.
Cassandra Lozano, I'm an artist and fan.
Shelley Fisher, I've been involved in art financing for many years at several different companies, beginning with Sotheby's and now at a small company, Medallion.
Jessica Porter, owner and director of Porter Contemporary.
Susan Schwab, artist, writer, sometimes curator.
Heather Vidari, Director of Experience Gallery.
Janice Ekdahl. I'm a librarian at the Bard Graduate Center for Tech Arts.
Ada Siniglio, acting director of Art Table, and this has been a marvelous program, and I think all of us deserve a hand.
Our next artist, which is going to be fantastic, is Kim Susha, and that is July 17th. So please keep it strong. It's a great networking. Thank you.